Good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. If you've been paying attention recently, you may have noticed a very unexpected trend. A number of establishment liberals, including Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, suddenly starting to wonder if open borders are really a good idea after all. Kind of amazing. What does it mean? Dana Perino will join us in a minute to explain their second thoughts. Later in the hour, our ambassador to Germany will tell us what happened to the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, when she opened her country's doors to 1 million refugees in a single year. It's possible there are lessons there for this country. Then tomorrow marks the anniversary of Matt Lauer's firing from NBC News for sexual harassment. A year later, has anything changed? We'll talk to a former NBC employee who says the cover-up at NBC is still very much in progress, and she's got details. Also tonight, a postscript in the long and exceptionally seedy saga of the creepy porn lawyer. His most famous client appears to have turned against him. Did he defraud her? Details on that just ahead. But first tonight, after 2 long years of the most expensive and wide-ranging independent counsel investigation in a generation, we should be close to nabbing those dastardly secret agents from Russia who hacked our presidential election. Are we? No, we're not. Robert Mueller's prosecutors are instead threatening elderly men with life in prison for petty crimes, crimes that have nothing to do with spying or Russia or anything else that threatens America. The whole thing is a grotesque joke, but you never know that from watching cable television. Here was CNN just yesterday in all its breathless stupidity.
Potentially big new questions in the Russia investigation and the corresponding lack of answers from the White House.
And any kind of collusion with the Russians.
And then there's the Russia investigation.
We know the Russians were involved in interfering with the election.
From Russians offering, as we know in the Trump Tower meeting, some kind of dirt on Hillary Clinton.
That Russian hackers began to target Clinton's accounts.
Fact. It's Russia.
Russia, says Don Lemon. The word itself is a kind of magical incantation that eliminates all skepticism and rational thought in journalists. Whatever the claim is, they believe it wholeheartedly. Not just because they're dumb, though obviously they are dumb, but because Russia! It's a spell, like Eye of Newt. Just yesterday, the Guardian newspaper reported that Paul Manafort, the former chairman of the Trump campaign, held a series of secret meetings with Julian Assange at the Ecuadorian embassy in London over a period of years. It all sounded very sinister. The problem is there is precisely no evidence that any of that actually happened. There's a lot of evidence to suggest the story is false. Assange is one of the most closely monitored people on the planet, living in Europe's most heavily surveilled city. And yet somehow nobody saw or recorded any of these meetings, which, by the way, everybody supposedly present denied ever took place. The whole thing was absurd. Under pressure from reality, The Guardian quickly walked back its story. And yet here's the key part. The geniuses in the American press corps continued to act like it was all completely real. The Washington Post senior political reporter Aaron Blake repeated The Guardian's claim as gospel. So did John Campbell of CNN and CNBC's John Harwood, not surprisingly. Because whatever, it sounded right. Manafort would probably meet with Assange in Russia or London, whatever. Who cares if he actually did? Keep in mind, these are reporters. They're supposed to be fact-based. They're supposed to be our watchdogs. They're not. These people are just mindless enforcers of whatever the establishment line of the day happens to be. They're intellectual thugs, dispatched to make the rest of us shut up and obey our ruling class. Who'd believe anything they say? Mollie Hemingway does not believe what they say. She's a senior editor at The Federalist, and she joins us tonight. Now, the Guardian story I pulled out because it's in a great piece that you wrote today, but also because it's a metaphor for a lot of our coverage. This story was transparently thin at best, and yet it was repeated as if it was real.
It's just like all of the other Russia stories that we've seen. There's a claim. It's a very hard to disprove claim. It doesn't really say exactly what's going on, but the Russia thing comes into play.
Russia!
And so everyone just falls for it. As journalists, though, we should have a higher standard. We should demand evidence. We should make sure that a story makes sense. And like you pointed out, the notion that Julian Assange could have a meeting with literally anyone and not be detected is hard to believe.
3 separate times over a period of years.
Not twice, but 3 times. It's not just a heavily surveilled city. He's holed up in the Ecuadorian embassy. They keep logs of who comes in. There's no record of Paul Manafort in those logs. The story explained this away by saying, oh, well, he failed to sign in. That's ludicrous. So you need to have a higher standard as a reporter, demand some evidence before falling for a story. And it's all of these stories are used to present a cloud of suspicion. It's not that Russia meddled in the election. They did. They have done that for decades. They do it. That's what they're known for. But the notion is that Donald Trump is a traitor who treasonously colluded with Russia to steal Hillary Clinton's election. That's the claim that has been put out in the media. That's the one that they have to prove. To say that they haven't come close to making that, to proving that claim, is an understatement.
The problem is that sometime very soon, this is going to culminate in a report from the special counsel's office, and we're going to have to chew over a lot of different allegations. And the people presenting those allegations to us have no credibility left. So where does that leave the country?
Well, I mean, this is the problem. I think you would assume that at this point, if people were still trying to push this theory, that they would understand that there's a problem. There's no evidence for it. There's no way you can actually, with a straight face, make this claim. You would assume that some reporters would start to try and backpedal. I don't know if they're just so embarrassed about how much they pushed it 2 years ago to undermine the incoming administration, if they're embarrassed about how they just received leaks from intel folks without doing due diligence on them, or if they just fell for the information operation because they weren't smart enough to see through it. I don't know if it's just that.
Can I ask you a quick question? We're almost out of time, but I'm just interested, since you follow this as closely as you do. Have you heard anybody in the press corps say, hey, wait a minute, here you have Robert Mueller threatening 72-year-old Jerome Corsi with prison because he couldn't remember forwarding an email? Maybe that's excessive. Has anybody said that?
There's been no skepticism on any aspect of this story. And there's been the other part of this is there have been a lot of things that we've learned about bad behavior and bad actions by senior officials in the government. And the media have not shown concern or care about that.
Because they're handmaidens to power, because their job is to defend the establishment.
It's shameful.
It is disgusting. Mollie, thank you.
Thank you.
Kim Strassel is on the Wall Street Journal editorial board. She's followed this story very closely and joins us pretty regularly for updates. Kim, it's great to see you tonight. What's the latest?
Hi, Tucker. So I think latest we've got out there is a new text that was released by Carter Page today, in which it shows that he was first contacted by reporters all the way back in July of 2016, asking him about specific claims that were made about him in that infamous dossier.
Yes.
And the reason this is important, Tucker, is you go and you look at the testimony from Fusion GPS founder Glenn Simpson, or depositions that were made by Christopher Steele's team, and they have always made it sound as though when they got this information, these explosive revelations supposedly about Carter Page, they went straight to the FBI. Their only interest was in national security and alerting law enforcement, and that they didn't actually go to the press until months later. Well, it turns out almost within days of him putting together these allegations, they were out shopping it to the press, seeing if they could get it out there in the middle of July.
So what you're saying is that this creepy foreigner with actual Russia ties, Christopher Steele, accuses a former naval officer, an Annapolis grad, falsely of being a Russian agent, and everybody in the press takes this at face value?
Well, look, I want to give credit where it's due, and I think this is important. According to Mr. Page, he was contacted by numerous reputable press outfits during the summer, all asking him this question. He denied it, and they never ran with the story.
Right.
It took Simpson and Fusion all the way up until September to finally get somebody to bite. But the point here, the bigger point, is it completely undermines this claim that this was just something they took to law enforcement. It's clear that already in the middle of July, before the FBI had ever started its counterintelligence investigation, that this was the chatter among the press corps, undoubtedly among most people in the Obama administration, probably within the intelligence agencies, and undoubtedly there was pressure being brought to bear on the FBI, therefore, to act.
Amazing. It's an amazing story. At some point, the whole story will be written, and I think it'll look very different. I hope you will write it. Kim Strassel, thanks very much for that.
Thank you.
Well, the special counsel investigation is accelerating. At some point, possibly soon, we're going to see Robert Mueller's report, or parts of it. If it's not released to the public, parts of it will certainly be leaked. will have that information. The question is, how should we assess it? Alan Dershowitz has thought a lot about this question. He's a retired Harvard Law School professor, author of The Case Against Impeaching Trump, and he joins us tonight. Professor, thanks for coming on. So are we likely to see this report in whole or part, and what should we think when we do?
Well, first, we will eventually see much of the report, probably the whole report eventually, but we should never see it until we also see the president's legal team rebuttal, because otherwise it's a completely one-sided presentation. Remember, it's like an indictment. Even though it won't be an indictment, it's one-sided. It's based on the testimony only of witnesses that the prosecution sought to call. And as everybody knows, an indictment can't be used as evidence of guilt. It doesn't undercut the presumption of innocence. It's just a charging document. And that's the way we ought to read the report issued by Mueller. It's simply an accusation, and we must see the other side of the story before we can come to any conclusion. Somehow people think it deserves more credibility because it's a special counsel report, but that's not true. Special counsel is just another prosecutor looking at one side of the case, and he will present a one-sided account, which will be very critical of his subjects.
So the report, there's no requirement that the report has balance in it or shows both sides of any question.
Quite the opposite. It's a prosecutorial report. It will not show balance. Anybody who expects balance, fairness, nuance is looking at the wrong kind of document. You can't have balance when you haven't heard the other side of the story, when you haven't called witnesses who might be exculpatory, when you've only tried to put together a prosecutorial case. And that's why it's essential that the president's team be permitted to issue their own report at the same time the Mueller report is issued.
Interesting. So the people who said we need a special counsel investigation to find out what happened as an informational exercise were lying to us. So let me ask you a more fundamental question about the special counsel.
Yeah.
So every person who wields power in our society by design has some sort of oversight. We can defeat our elected representatives in elections. We can recall or impeach our president, our judges. The special counsel, we're told, can't be fired because that itself would be an impeachable offense. So is there oversight of any kind of the special counsel?
Well, first of all, firing the special counsel would not be an impeachable offense because it wouldn't be a crime. The president would have the authority to do it. It would be politically very damaging to do it. Look, technically, there is oversight over the special counsel in the personage of the attorney general. Of course, our attorney general was recused. Now we have an acting attorney general. But the regulations provide that the attorney general is not supposed to micromanage the work of the special counsel. He's not like any other U.S. attorney who's under the direct supervision. The ultimate control the attorney general has is whether to release the report, under what circumstances to release the report, whether to redact parts of the report, whether to reject parts of the report and send it back to the special counsel and say, look, you didn't do a good enough job, go back to the drawing board and do it again. It's unlikely any of those things will occur, except I think that the attorney general would be wise to demand that before the special counsel report is released to the public or even to Congress, that the president's legal team be given an opportunity to review and rebut it and provide their own report. Then the American public and Congress can see both sides in tandem and make an intelligent decision as to where the right is and how to bring nuance and find the truth. The truth is best achieved through an adversarial process, through presenting all sides of an issue, not presenting one side of an issue.
That's the whole premise of this show, by the way. Professor, thank you. Great to see you tonight.
Thank you.